I remember just sitting there, angry at a dead body. I remember looking at the red blanket and thinking, your criminal greed, your desire to get rich quick, your desire to go and rob rival drug dealers, and your actions made me kill you.
Hello and welcome back to a special Christmas episode of Crime Suspect. This year we've unravelled some of the UK's most prolific crimes, as well as provided in-depth analysis on the criminality that plagues our nation. On the show today, the thin blue line. Is the intense scrutiny on armed police officers' use of fatal force making their jobs impossible and the public less safe? Next, is it safe in your neighbourhood? I'll be taking you, virtually, to Bath for this week's postcode watch. And finally, it's your chance to book a crook as we show you this week's wanted criminals. Joining me in the studio today is former Detective Superintendent Shabnam Chowdhury, The Sun's crime editor Mike Sullivan, and last but not least, probably the most scrutinised former armed police officer ever, Mr. Tony Long. Thank you all very much for joining me today. Now, you have the right to remain watching. This is Crime Suspect. The Metropolitan Police Commissioner, Sir Mark Rowley, is calling for urgent reforms to make things fairer for officers who can face years of scrutiny over their handling of life and death incidents. He recently claimed that marksmen would rather face terrorists than gangland criminals because there would be less of a legal backlash to have to contend with. We've seen 6 terrorists shot dead in 4 major incidents in London since 2017, and there wasn't a single firearms officer who was arrested or subjected to long probes in the aftermath by the Independent Office for Police Conduct. Mike, efforts at accountability so far do not appear to have restricted armed police officers from doing their job, so why should there be a call for less scrutiny?
Well, I think arguably it does restrict them from doing their job, actually, because the evidence would suggest, or anecdotal and speaking to officers, that they are so nervous about the law that it has the potential to actually prevent them from using their powers properly on occasions, and that's not to doubt their professionalism. But they're trying to do, in a sense, they're trying to face the suspect, someone that is likely to have a firearm. And in another sense, they're trying to think of the potential backlash, the years that they may have to wait under scrutiny, the 3 different levels of scrutiny. So you've got discipline, inquiry, inquest, and then criminal. And yeah, it takes years to go through. In the meantime, they can't actually use their firearms. They're on restricted duties. And so the question that Mark Rowley is asking is, do we need to reset the balance? He argues that we should. And that accountability, yes, there definitely needs to be accountability. But has it gone too far?
Well, we're very fortunate to have Tony with us because, of course, your actions have been scrutinised time and time again. In fact, you stood trial charged with the murder of Azelle Rodney, and I spent a lot of time at the public inquiry that followed your acquittal of that charge. What impacts did the scrutiny have on you? Did you think it was fair? And where are we at now?
Can I just jump in on what Mike was saying now? I'm not sure that the police service or Sir Mark Rowley, on behalf of the police service, is asking for less scrutiny. I think we're talking about more efficient scrutiny and quicker scrutiny. So, Shabnam, you were a detective superintendent. Yeah, you could have ended up having to investigate a headless corpse in a building skip in the back street of Hackney. Yeah, the IOPC turn up at a murder scene, if you want to call it that, which of course it isn't, and the murder victim is lying on the floor, and the murder suspect is that, yeah, it was me. Here's my gun. This is how many rounds I fired. You want a statement? I'll give you a statement. What takes the time for an investigation to the IOPC compared with a proper murder investigation by an established Home Office police force? It just seems that the time that they take is just incredible.
In the Azelle Rodney case, you had about 7 or was it 9 seconds? How long did you have to make that decision to discharge your firearm? And what did it feel like?
Well, so one of the reasons I was charged was because they stated that I'd made the decision to fire in less than a second. And they worked that on the basis of the sort of black box, for want of a better word, that's in every police vehicle that was able to geo-position the vehicles, and a video that was taken from the rear police vehicle in the convoy. And they managed to put the two together to come up with a computer reconstruction. And they decided that everything I'd said in my statement that I had seen, that I had described as seeing through the side window of the vehicle, couldn't have been right, because my vehicle came to rest and 0.5 seconds later I opened fire. So they were saying for me to have made that decision in that period of time wasn't realistic. And to be honest, I agree with them. But actually, when you looked at it, I'd been following the vehicle with an unobstructed view of the rear seat passenger, Azelle Rodney, for 10 seconds prior to me shooting, which is an exceptionally long time in circumstances like that. So I'd watched his behaviour. It had concerned me from the outset.
Shabnam,
Yep.
now, in your role as a senior detective, you've called upon firearms officers, I'm sure, on a number of occasions, and importantly, and linked to what Tony is saying, is briefings. Have you had input from specialist firearms officers when you've gone to those briefings before an event, like Azelle Rodney getting shot? And what's that process like?
Well, generally speaking, as a borough detective, some of the incidents that you deal with are very fast time. They're dealt with on a minute-by-minute basis. So if we've got an incident as a fire where there's firearms present, I would attend as the firearms incident command controller. That doesn't mean to say that I am firearms trained. What I then do is I will call upon tactical advisors. So I will get a team of firearms trained officers, specially trained, who will come to the scene, who will advise me, who will work around the national decision-making model, who will advise me as to what we should, what we shouldn't do, how we can get into a premises, how we can get someone to put down their guns, and to make sure that everybody is protected and kept safe. There isn't an officer within policing that will tell you that they do not expect to be held to account.
Absolutely.
Police officers are held to the highest levels of scrutiny.
Quite right.
Quite rightly so. What they ask for, and the reason why there is now an accountability review, is that they are treated fairly, that they are treated with the investigation is competent, that when officers, particularly when you talk about firearms officers, are making split-second decisions, that there's a balance to be had within that investigation, and that's what they're asking for.
Now, this current review, which is going on, may deliver that for officers because, of course, it stemmed from the militancy of firearms officers, some of whom laid down their weapons back in September of this year and said, we're not taking them out onto the street. We're not going to do our job. That kind of militancy is very rarely seen amongst police officers, isn't it, Mike?
Yeah, I mean, the consequences can be potentially extremely damaging and harmful to the public. So it's not something that can be done lightly. But I understand in this instance, the officers didn't feel mentally able to carry a firearm because they were so upset about the colleague having been charged with murder, which we can't go into at the moment quite clearly. But it's extremely unusual. London was effectively left without any counter-terror policing firearms covered.
Yeah, but Tony, our police officers are public servants. They can be cross, they can be aggrieved, but essentially they are paid out of the public purse. They surely should not throw a strop and metaphorically throw their toys out of the pram or lay their weapons down. That is failing the public.
But they're also volunteers. Out of the 30-odd thousand officers in the Metropolitan Police, there's only about 2,500 officers that have made the decision to carry firearms.
This is a job that comes with status, and it's not rolling around with burglars and robbers and delivering death messages on the front line of response policing. But, Shab, you've not long been retired from the Metropolitan Police. There's a lot of respect for you out there amongst colleagues, and I know you've got your sources. So what's the current mood music amongst the armed police officers that you speak to?
Well, I think, first of all, I think they welcome the review because I think they do need some changes within police. Remember, part of that review is about police use of force. It's about driving standards and so on. Remember, PC Fisher, who was the lead armed officer in a convoy of 2 vehicles, was recently acquitted after 2 people were stabbed over at Southwark.
Acquitted of dangerous driving because he had an accident
Streatham.
on the way
Yes,
to a
Streatham, sorry.
terrorist incident in Streatham, yeah.
But he's still got hanging over his head that there potentially could be a gross misconduct hearing for him. So there is a lot of nervousness around policing. I think there are a lot of officers within the Firearms Command that are being even more scrutinised at the moment in the way they behave, their standards of behaviour. But I think one of the points that's been missed here is about the human side of policing across the whole of policing. I would not want or expect any police officer, particularly those that are carrying firearms, to come into work when they've got a huge amount of stress going on, when there's personal issues going on. So the fact is that they use this period of reflection.
Can I just add one other thing? Chad mentioned about, throwing, and you did, about, throwing teddies out of prams and the timing of that. Well, when else would you say, if people handed their cards in because of the decision of that officer, being charged, but more like the biggest concern was the loss of anonymity. Now, when else would you do it? You do it because something pertinent has raised that issue and caused that concern. So that's why it was done when it was done. You can't time something
But I think my
better.
point was around the public perception. I think that it's absolutely right for officers to take that period of reflection if they want to.
We've heard a lot about, sort of loss and anonymity and feelings and all of that. There surely is no greater loss than to lose a loved one.
Yeah, of course.
You've spent many time not only with police officers but with families of people who've lost loved ones.
Yeah.
And we need to remember that each time a police officer pulls a trigger and there is a fatal wound,
Of course.
there's a loss of a loved one.
Of course, no. My own sister died through homicide back in 1992, so I'm aware of the consequences of how serious this is. I would say, looking at it with experience of covering these things, you've got to first of all remember that no police officer involved in a fatal firearms incident ever goes into work with the intention of shooting someone. And the people like Tony and others I've met who have been involved in firearms incidents are very sombre about the whole thing. There's no gung-ho approach. It is a tragedy. People have to live with what they've done, as you do, Tony.
I remember after shooting Azelle Rodney, stood at the scene. We haven't been given permission to go. I'm taken away from the immediate scene and sat in the control vehicle, which was a people carrier. And I remember seeing my colleagues working on Azelle Rodney, giving him CPR, trying to keep him alive. I remember just sitting there, angry at a dead body. I remember looking at the red blanket and thinking, your criminal greed, your desire to get rich quick, your desire to go and rob rival drug dealers, and your actions made me kill you. And now my life is going to go on hold for what turned out to be the next 10 years.
I would want to cry if I heard other officers making that kind of a statement, because at the end of the day, criminal or not, and the decision that you made that decision. The fact is, that is another human being, okay? That is somebody's son, somebody's family member, somebody's loved one. The job of the police is to protect and to serve. I'm not disputing what you said. No, hang on.
A, you've never been in my position.
No,
and
I
B,
haven't.
can I just say this? That inquiry took 10 years. And all through that time, Azelle Rodney's mother, quite rightly, fought to find out what had happened to her son. Now, I'm a parent, I've got my own children, and there came a point where I actually started doing a bit of detective work on the internet, and I found out Susan Alexander's mobile phone number. And I literally got to the point of standing in a telephone box, and I was going to ring her up and say, you don't know me, and I'm not going to tell you who I am, but I'm going to tell you why it was that what your son was up to that day and why it was that he was shot by police. Because I felt that she was entitled to know. But because of the legal setup, she went for not 10 years, but she went for at least 5 years not knowing why her son was dead, believing that her son was just an innocent party in the back of a car.
So
So don't tell me that I don't understand, because I do.
I'm not
And
saying
don't-
you
So,
don't
so do
understand.
we need more transparency with regards to the entire investigation of these sort of incidents?
Without a doubt.
Transparency for the families that lose a loved one, transparency for the officer who's had to pull the trigger.
Transparency for the public.
Post Mark Duggan, what happened there was some information was released by the IOPC or the IPCC as they were
Too
then. And the suggestion was in the statement that Mark Duggan had fired a shot. There was a police officer's radio, I think, from memory got hit. Well, actually, it was a police officer who not only killed Mark Duggan, but also fired a shot, which was a stray one.
It passed through Duggan and it hit the police officer.
It passed through, right, OK. But so that bit of misleading information was enough to stoke up the anger, and there was a vacuum of information.
Yeah.
It led to a protest outside Tottenham Police Station, and we all know what happened there.
The riots of 2011.
Well, the shutters got brought down in a bit of a panic. The family supporters were quite understandably very upset. Some people took the law into their own hands. It ended up with the riots spreading.
Thank you all for dealing with a clearly emotive, sensitive and important subject. I'm going to wave my magic wand and I would like a one short sentence answer. With regards to the scrutiny, the accountability, in one sentence, what can make things better?
A better balance, more timeliness and information being released as quickly as possible.
Thank you. Tony?
I would say the independent officer of police complaints being truly independent and being fair, being required in law to be fair to both the people they're investigating and the families of victims of police action.
Timely, accurate, accountable. Shabnam, one
Independent.
sentence, please.
Independent.
And recognising that when split-second decisions are made, that any investigation balances that out.
Thank you all very much indeed. Right, moving on to this week's postcode watch, and we're in Bath. The annual crime rate here was 72 crimes per 1,000 people in 2022. The most common crimes in Bath are violence and sexual offences, with 2,839 offences during 2022, which is 13% higher than 2021's figure of 2,506. The least common but growing crime here is possession of weapons, with 36 offences recorded in 2022, an increase of 64% from 2021's figure of 22. Now, if you happen to live in central Bath and Lansdowne, then look away now, as it's the most dangerous neighbourhood, followed by Kingsmead in second place and Twerton in third. Bath's safest neighbourhoods are Broomfield, Weston and Widcombe, Bathwick Hill and Claverton Down. And if you ever get the chance to go to Bath, take it. It's a beautiful part of the country. All right, it's time for the part of the show where we bring you the mugs of thugs who are terrorising our streets. But firstly, let's take a look back over some of our successful appeals since the show began earlier this year. With your help, a total of 13 crooks were caught and subsequently punished for their crimes. Thank you to everyone who shared our appeal or called in with information. Moving on to this week's Wanted. Have you seen these criminals? First up is this suspect. Brandon Lee Norton from Bagshot is wanted for breach of bail. Brandon is described as white, around 6 foot tall, of slim build with brown hair and blue eyes. He has a distinctive blue diamond tattoo on his neck with a star tattooed above it. Next, we have Sean Gallagher. He's wanted on a recall to prison for breach of his licence conditions. Gallagher is 5'10" tall, of medium build, with brown short hair and brown eyes. Lastly, have you seen these criminals? Police are asking the public to help identify two men as they investigate a watch robbery in Camden. The victim, a man in his 50s, was pulled to the floor before the suspects ripped the man's black and gold Rolex Yachtmaster from his wrist and ran off in the direction of Frognall Road. If you think you know or have seen any of these crooks, get in touch anonymously with Crime Stoppers on 0800 555 111. Right, that's all we've got time for this week. Many thanks to Shabnam, Mike and Tony. From all of the team here, we'd like to wish you a safe and very happy Christmas. Be sure to leave us a comment, like and subscribe, and we'll be back next year to bring you more Crime Suspect.